Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. This is some new video from the Japan earthquake that took place on New Year's Day. I don't believe that this is the tsunami that took place. It looks like a mudslide, but according to this post on X, this is from the earthquake on New Year's Day. And I got a lot of comments on that video, and there's at least one person that mentioned the fact that there was a solar flare, because there's kind of like this unofficial theory that solar flares will, especially when there's like big ones, X-class flares, that they tend to affect Earth as well and cause earthquakes. And I was confused because I was like, well, that X-class solar flare, that was like a couple of weeks ago. I don't think that if that was the case, it would have taken this long before it affected Earth. I'm not necessarily a proponent of that idea. I'm, open to it. I know a lot of people, like a lot of YouTubers that are into space weather and stuff like that and earthquakes. A lot of them have adopted this idea, and I'm sure that's possibly the case. So, but I was confused because I never heard any of them say that it could take that long before the flare affects Earth. So you might remember I did a video about this a couple of weeks ago. There's this video on disclose.tv. The sun emitted a X.28 solar flare today, the strongest solar flare of the current cycle. And like I said, I did a video about it right here. And what was interesting about that solar flare was that it was the largest since 2017. And according to news reports like this one from Miami Herald, it caused one of the largest solar radio wave events ever recorded, right? So as it turns out, I just happened upon a story yesterday while looking at X, where after this solar flare took place a couple weeks ago, there was an even bigger one that happened, of all days, on New Year's Eve. So this is from Dr. Ryan French. Tonight's X5 hashtag solar flare. Although the peak of the flare has passed, the flare is very much still ongoing. We can expect, okay, so anyway, you can see the solar flare right here. So this was news to me. I went ahead and I put it on my Second Coming timeline. So December 14th, that's when there was the X2.8 solar flare with one of the largest radio events ever recorded. And then in largest solar flare since the 10th of September 2017. And then, of all numbers, 17 days later, again, President Nelson is the 17th president of the church. We saw a lot of 17s a couple of years ago. We talked about that. I think it was in 2022 when there was all the 17s showing up. 17 is 10 plus 7, both numbers of perfection and completion. So 17 days later, you have this X5 solar flare. And then the day after that, yeah, there was that really big earthquake, and that resulted in a tsunami as well in Japan. Okay, so that's pretty strange. It makes me think, and I don't know, like I said, I've been doing a lot of New Year's videos lately, and it seems like there's things sometimes that happen right then as the year's changing to another. So in this case, December 31st, it reminded me of, let's see, it was New Year's Eve 2022. That was the day that Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI passed away, age 95, longest living pope of all time. It was on New Year's Eve. It was a weird thing to happen. And then again, just a couple weeks later, on the 17th of all days of January 2023, Lucille Randon passed away, longest living nun of all time. So here's just another weird thing that's happened recently. On December 31st, that's how the year ended, was with this X5 solar flare. So I wanted to read just a little bit about this. This is on NASA. Strong solar flare erupts from sun. The sun emitted a strong solar flare peaking at 4:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on December 31st, 2023. NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory, which watches the sun constantly, captured an image of the event. So here's a still of it, but we were just watching the the video of it right here, and you can tell it looks pretty intense. The flare is classified as an X 5.0 flare. X class denotes the most intense flares, while the number provides more information about its strength. Okay, over to Forbes. 2023 ends with strongest X class solar flare for 6 years. Get ready for Aurora. Now, that refers to the fact, let me just show you again. I have this spreadsheet called Profits, President Nelson's Bookends, where I added this as a bookend because the last time there was a solar flare this strong was September 10th, 2017. It was an X 8.2 solar flare. And then the next strongest solar flare was on the 14th of December, but then it got passed up just 17 days later on the 31st. So you have this thing going on here. It's kind of similar to some of the other things that we've seen, like the sandwiching, where you have like 3 events. And it seems like, in fact, I'm going to change this color to a lighter yellow because now it's a little bit less significant than the other two. I have my new spreadsheets. I created a new one for solar flares. So I had this one at the time that I made the last video, and I've renamed it to Signs Solar Flares Top 50 because on this website, spaceweatherlive.com, they have this section of the website that has the top 50 solar flares since 1996. So this was the data that I was originally working with. But then I found another part of their website where they have the top 50 solar flares for each solar cycle, going back to solar cycle 23. So that gave me more complete data, and so I made another spreadsheet. So this one is just the top 50 since 1996, and we were looking at this, and as you can see, every single year, with the exception of just a few years, you had an X-class solar flare. Okay. There weren't any in 1999. And then from 2007 to 2010, there weren't any, at least not that were part of the top 50. Okay. So there was like a blank spot right there. And it turns out I did some more investigation, and it seems that it's because that time coincided with solar minimum. So here's like a graph showing the different solar cycles from solar cycle 20 to the current one, solar cycle 25. And so you can see there's, maximum, and then it dips down to minimum, and it just continues. And so right here, that space of time that we were just looking at, 2007 to 2010, coincided with solar minimum for that cycle. Okay. And so that makes sense. But what's interesting, I think, is that solar minimum happened to coincide with the transition between President Gordon B. Hinckley and Thomas S. Monson. So it was a time that the sun quieted down, and then it kind of roars back to life. And it turns out that solar maximum was about in the middle, more or less, of President Monson's presidency. And then it quiets back down. We don't have any X-class solar flares on the top 50 in 2016. And then during President Nelson's presidency, and again, roughly at the same time as the transition between President Monson and President Nelson, you have all these years, 2018 to 2022, that didn't produce any X-class solar flares that were on the top 50. I mean, that's 5 years straight. And as we look at this spreadsheet that I put together, that's like the longest period of time without an X-class solar flare that's on the top 50 since 1996. So that was kind of interesting. And then again, at the end of 2023, you end up having the 2.8. It's interesting because that's like a mirror of the previous one in 2017, 8.2, 8.2, 2.8. And then on New Year's Eve, the 5, just 17 days later. Okay, now here's the more complete one where I have the top 50 of each solar cycle, starting with solar cycle 23, and then there's 24, and then we're currently in 25. And I put together this this graph right here to kind of visualize it a little bit differently. The trend line, now this would be in terms of like strength of these solar flares. The trend line is actually going down, but here, let me zoom in. Let's go to 125. So here's the last strongest solar flare in September 10th, 2017. Okay, so this is the one that we're talking about as we're talking about these two. These are the strongest since this one, September 10th, 2017, which is interesting because that's just one day after President Nelson's birthday. And the next strongest one before that was September 6th of 2017. So that is also just 3 days before his birthday. I checked hebcal.com, and these did not coincide with any Jewish feast days because September usually sees Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but this did not coincide with either one of those or anything else. So here you go. So you have this, and then you have like this pretty quiet time right here, as we saw in the other spreadsheet. And then here's the 2.8 and the 5.0 on New Year's Day. Okay. And I don't think there's really much to show you here. It pretty much matches up with the other spreadsheet. You know, you have this quiet time right here at the end of President Hinckley's presidency. Okay. And then the quiet time at the beginning of President Nelson's presidency. But because we have more complete data, you can see the smaller X-class solar flares, toward the beginning in 2021 and stuff like that, 2022. And then here's the two that we're talking about right now. Okay. So continuing with Forbes, 2023 ends with strongest X-class solar flare for 6 years. Get ready for Aurora. A massive X5 class solar flare was detected by Earth orbiting satellites just hours before 2024 began. The most potent eruption the sun has produced since 2017. Its aftermath looks set to cause a geomagnetic storm on Earth on January 2nd, which could mean displays of the northern lights, also called Aurora Borealis in the northern hemisphere. Solar flare, according to NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center, it peaked at 21:55 UTC or 4:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on December 31st, shortly after NASA declared on social media that 2023's most significant flare was the X 2.8 flare on December 14th. NASA Solar Dynamics Observatory detected it. Okay. And then just a little bit more. This is from The Hill. Strongest solar flare since 2017 detected. Here's what to know. Solar flares are classified based on their strength, much like earthquakes, according to NASA. The scale ranges from B class on the lowest end to C class, then M class, then finally X class. Each letter represents a 10-fold increase in energy output, and there's a scale of 1 to 9 in each class, except for X class. X class flares can exceed 9, with the largest ever recorded being an X45 that occurred in 2003. And you could see that here. Let's go back up to the top. It's almost like, for all intents and purposes, it's basically off the charts. It's this one right here. It just dominates every other one that you can see on this chart. So here's the X45, 2003. After that, the next biggest one was 2001 in X28. And then also in 2003 in X24.57. In 2005 at 24.42. So during this time, during President Nelson or President Hinckley's time, there were some really big solar flares. So I guess we'll have to see what happens over the next few months and years as we enter the solar maximum for solar cycle 25. Could it get back up to this, to these strengths? I don't know. I guess we'll have to see. Okay, back to the article. At X5, Sunday's flare was much smaller than the flare recorded in 2003. It was, however, the strongest since September 2017, when an X8.2 flare was detected, according to the Space Weather Prediction Center. This flare also supersedes an X2.8 solar flare reported in the same region of the sun on December 14th. At the time, the Space Weather Prediction Center reported that flare was likely one of the largest solar radio events ever recorded. Yeah, and that one actually affected Earth. I haven't checked yet. I should have done this for this video. I haven't checked yet to see if this X5 affected Earth, but the X2.8 on the 14th did. And you can see that here in column E. And that was another unusual thing. And I feel like another thing that makes this kind of a bookend is that the one in 2017 affected Earth, as well as the one on December 14th. But when you go back in time, it's not very common for these flares to affect Earth. Before that, you have to go back to 2005 and then 2003, 2001, 2000, and that's it. So these two bookend flares, it's like they match each other, both because of the mirroring 8.2 and 2.8, as well as the fact that they affected Earth, as well as the fact that one was right before President Nelson's presidency began, just a few months before, and then this one toward the end. Of course, we don't know if it's the end, but if it's a bookend, then yes. Okay, and then back to the Hill. The Space Weather Prediction Center said those using high-frequency radio signals, like emergency managers, may notice a temporary degradation or complete loss of signal on much of the sunlit side of the Earth as a result of Sunday's solar flare. Okay. And I think that's pretty much it. It's pretty much all I wanted to cover. This Wikipedia article, it shows you basically the dates for each solar cycle. So the first solar cycle, I guess where they began doing, recording solar cycles was 1755. And so the current solar cycle began on, December 2019. So relatively recently. The one before that started in 2008. The one before that, 1996. And then here, the unofficial cycles starting with maximum. Okay, never mind. That's not what I thought it was. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Okay, so there's that news. It's weird. So I guess we have to ask and wonder, when is the next X-class solar flare going to happen? We're basically getting into solar maximums, so I would assume that there's probably going to be more. But anyway, just some interesting things about these two. This one being on the last day of the year, just 17 days after the previous one, and the largest one since the 10th of September 2017. It's weird. All right, but that's going to be it for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.